The letter arrived at Vernon Xavier's ranch on a Tuesday morning in March of 1876, smudged with dust from its long journey through the Colorado Territory. And he read it 3 times before accepting that someone actually wanted to marry him despite never having laid eyes on his weathered face. He sat on the porch of his modest ranch house just outside Granite, Colorado, watching the sun climb over the Sawatch Range while his calloused fingers traced the careful handwriting. The woman who had written to him, Katherine Sullivan, had been honest in a way that made his chest tighten with something he had not felt in years. She wrote that she was 23 years old, had lost both parents to fever the previous winter, and needed a fresh start somewhere far from the memories that haunted her in Pennsylvania. She mentioned that she could cook and sew, that she loved reading when she could get her hands on books, and that she had one significant flaw he should know about before he made any decisions. "I am terribly clumsy," she had written in her neat script. "I have broken more dishes than I can count, tripped over my own feet more times than is dignified for a grown woman, and once managed to fall into a horse trough while simply walking past it. I feel you deserve to know this before you decide whether you still want a wife who might very well burn down your kitchen or stumble into a cactus on her first day in Colorado." Vernon had laughed out loud when he read that part, startling his dog sleeping at his feet. He read the letter again, then pulled out a piece of paper and began composing his response. His handwriting was not as refined as hers, shaped more by ledgers and cattle counts than formal education, but he wrote from somewhere deep and honest within himself. "Miss Sullivan," he began, then crossed it out and started over. "Katherine, if I may call you that, your letter brought the first real smile to my face in longer than I care to admit. As for your clumsiness, I have spent the last 8 years building a ranch with my own 2 hands. These hands have caught runaway calves, steadied spooked horses, and kept more things from falling than I can count. If you will have me as your husband, then I will catch you every time you stumble. I promise you that." He mailed the letter that same afternoon, riding into Granite with a purpose in his step that made old Henry at the general store raise his eyebrows. The weeks that followed passed slower than molasses in January. Vernon found himself fixing up the ranch house with renewed energy, patching the roof, whitewashing the porch railings, and even attempting to make curtains from fabric he bought in town, though the result looked more like feed sacks hung on a line. His nearest neighbor, a gruff cattleman named Thomas Ward who ran the adjacent property, noticed the changes immediately. "You planning on selling the place or getting yourself a wife?" Thomas asked one afternoon, watching Vernon struggle with a paintbrush. "Wife," Vernon answered, not looking up from his work. "Mail order bride from Pennsylvania. She will be here in 3 weeks if the trains run on time." Thomas let out a low whistle. "You have not even met her and you are already painting the house." "What if she takes one look at this dusty stretch of nothing and gets right back on that train?" Vernon paused, considering this possibility for the first time with real concern. "Then, I suppose, I will have the cleanest ranch house in Granite and a story to tell." But he did not believe she would leave. Something in her letter, in the honest way she had presented her flaws right up front, told him she was the kind of woman who kept her word. Still, when the day came for her arrival, he found himself pacing the small train platform in Granite like a caged animal, his best shirt buttoned tight enough to make breathing difficult, his hair slicked back with more pomade than was probably necessary. The train was 40 minutes late, which gave him plenty of time to contemplate all the ways this could go wrong. She might be horrified by how plain he looked, how his nose sat slightly crooked from a long-ago break, how his hands were too rough and his manners too simple. She might find Colorado too wild, too far from civilization, too different from everything she had known. When the train finally pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam, Vernon felt his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Several passengers disembarked, a family with screaming children, two businessmen in city suits, and then her. He knew it was Katherine the moment he saw her, though she looked nothing like the mental image he had constructed. She was smaller than he had imagined, with dark auburn hair pinned up under a simple bonnet, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. She wore a traveling dress of deep green that brought out the color of those eyes, and she carried a single worn carpet bag that looked like it had seen better days. She stepped carefully down from the train, clearly concentrating on each movement, and made it to the platform without incident. Vernon watched her scan the small crowd, saw the moment her gaze landed on him, watched her face transform with a smile that made something in his chest crack open. He moved toward her, removing his hat, suddenly aware of every awkward inch of his 6'2" frame. "Miss Sullivan, Katherine." "Mr. Xavier." Her voice was softer than he had expected, with a slight tremor that might have been nerves or excitement or both. "Vernon." "Yes, madam, welcome to Granite." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she was prettier than mountain sunrise, that he was grateful she had come, that he would do everything in his power to make her happy here. Instead, he just stood there like a fool, turning his hat in his hands. She smiled at him again, and he noticed she had a small gap between her front teeth that was somehow endearing. "I am so pleased to finally meet you. Your letters were so kind. I almost could not believe anyone would be willing to take a chance on someone like me." "Someone like you seems just about perfect to me," Vernon said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "Can I take your bag?" Katherine nodded and handed it over, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact sent something electric up his arm, and from the way her eyes widened slightly, he thought maybe she felt it too. They started walking toward where he had left his wagon, and Katherine was doing fine until her boot caught on an uneven plank in the platform. She pitched forward with a small gasp, and Vernon dropped her bag and caught her around the waist before she could fall, steadying her against his chest. "Oh my goodness," she breathed, her face flushing pink as she looked up at him. "I am so sorry. I told you I was clumsy." "We have not even made it off the platform, and already I am proving what a disaster I am." Vernon kept his hands on her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary, marveling at how perfectly she seemed to fit there. "And I told you I would catch you every time." "Seems like we are both keeping our word." The pink in her cheeks deepened to rose, and she ducked her head in a way that made him want to tilt her chin back up so he could see her eyes. Instead, he released her reluctantly, picked up her bag, and offered his arm. She took it, her hand resting light as a bird on his forearm, and they made it to the wagon without further incident. The ride back to the ranch took about 20 minutes, and Vernon found himself talking more than he had in months, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the town, the ranch, the neighbors. Katherine listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she had been paying attention to his letters, remembering details he had mentioned about his herd and the land. "How long have you been ranching here?" she asked, watching the landscape roll by with evident fascination. 8 years now. I came out here right after the war ended, looking for something different than what Pennsylvania had to offer. Worked for other ranchers for a few years, saved up enough to buy my own land, and have been building it up ever since." He glanced at her, trying to gauge her reaction to the wild emptiness surrounding them. "It is not much compared to cities back east, but it is mine, ours if you will have it. If I will have it," Katherine repeated, looking at him with surprise. "Vernon, I came all this way to marry you. Of course I will have it. I will have you and this beautiful wild place and whatever life we can build together." The simplicity of her words, the conviction in them, made Vernon's throat tight. "We should probably talk about the marriage itself. I spoke with Reverend Matthews in town. He can perform the ceremony whenever you are ready. Tomorrow if you want, or we can wait. I do not want you to feel rushed into anything." Katherine was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the mountains in the distance. "I think tomorrow would be fine," she said finally. "I know this is unusual, marrying someone I just met, but I made my choice when I answered your first letter. I do not see much point in drawing it out unless you need more time." "No," Vernon said quickly, then cleared his throat. "I mean, tomorrow is fine with me. Good, even. I just want you to be certain." "I am certain," she said, and when she looked at him, he saw no doubt in her eyes, just a quiet determination that matched his own. The ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, and Vernon watched Katherine's face anxiously as she took it in. The house was small but sturdy, built from local timber with a wide porch he had added last year. The barn stood behind it, freshly painted red, and beyond that stretched the pastures where his cattle grazed, their forms dark against the spring grass. "It is wonderful," Katherine breathed, and he could hear the sincerity in her voice. "Vernon, it is truly wonderful. You built all of this yourself, most of it. Had help with the barn raising, but the rest I did on my own." He pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake, then jumped down and came around to help her. She stood on the wagon bed and turned to climb down, and he reached up, hands on her waist again, lifting her down as easily as if she weighed nothing. She stumbled slightly when her feet hit the ground, but he was right there, steadying her, and they stood for a moment in the afternoon sunlight, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for catching you, for everything." She stepped back, smoothing her skirts, looking flustered in a way he found absolutely charming. "For bringing me here, for giving me a chance at a new life, for being patient with my foolishness." "It is not foolishness," Vernon said firmly. "Come on, let me show you the house." He gave her a tour of the modest home, watching as she took in the main room that served as kitchen and living space, the 2 bedrooms, the small pantry he had stocked full in anticipation of her arrival. She exclaimed over details he had barely noticed, the window that looked out toward the mountains, the sturdy table he had built, the rocking chair that had been his mother's and was one of the few things he had brought from Pennsylvania. "Your mother's?" Katherine asked, running her hand over the smooth wood. "She died when I was 12. I could not bear to leave it behind when I came west." Vernon had not talked about his mother in years, but something about Katherine made the words come easier. "She used to sit in that chair and read to me. She was the one who taught me to love books, even though we only had a handful." "My mother loved reading too," Katherine said softly. "She would have liked you, I think. Would have liked knowing I was going somewhere with mountains and wide open sky instead of staying in that cramped boarding house, working my fingers to the bone in a factory." "You worked in a factory after my parents died. There was not much else for a single woman with no family." She said it matter-of-factly, but Vernon heard the weight of loneliness in her words, a loneliness that matched his own. "You have family now," he said. "Me, if you will have me. It is not much, but it is yours." Katherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she smiled at him with such genuine warmth that he felt something shift in his chest, something that felt suspiciously like his heart recognizing its other half. They spent the rest of the afternoon settling her in. Vernon had given her the larger bedroom, insisting he would take the smaller one until after the wedding, until she was comfortable with the arrangement. Katherine protested, but he was firm, and eventually she accepted with a grace that told him she appreciated his consideration. As evening approached, Vernon attempted to make dinner, which consisted mainly of beans, bacon, and biscuits that came out harder than they should have. Katherine laughed when she bit into one, not mockingly but with real amusement, and the sound filled the house with something it had been missing, something like joy. "I promise my cooking is better than this," Vernon said, feeling his ears burn. "I was nervous and left them in too long." "I think they are perfect," Katherine said, dunking hers in her coffee to soften it. "Besides, cooking is one thing I actually can do well. It is only when I have to move around the kitchen that things get dangerous. I once knocked over an entire pot of stew just by turning around too fast." "Then I will make sure to build you a kitchen where everything is secured down tight," Vernon said, and her smile in response was worth any amount of work. They talked late into the evening, sitting on the porch as the stars came out in a blanket so thick it seemed impossible. Katherine had never seen stars like this, she said, had never imagined the sky could hold so much light. Vernon found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about his dreams for the ranch, about the loneliness of the past few years, about how her letter had felt like an answer to a prayer he had been too stubborn to pray. When she finally excused herself to bed, claiming exhaustion from the journey, Vernon sat on the porch a while longer, smoking his pipe and marveling at how much his life had changed in a single day. Tomorrow he would marry this woman he barely knew, and somehow that felt more right than anything he had done in years. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Vernon was up before the sun, doing chores with nervous energy. He fed the cattle, mucked out the barn, and was washing up at the pump when Katherine emerged from the house wearing a dress he had not seen before, a soft blue that made her hair look like copper fire in the early light. "Is that what you are wearing to our wedding?" she asked, eyeing his work clothes with amusement. Vernon looked down at himself and laughed. "No, madam, I have a proper suit inside. Just wanted to get the work done early so we would not be rushed." They rode into Granite together mid-morning, and if anyone found it odd that Vernon Xavier was bringing his mail-order bride to the church the very day after she arrived, they were too polite to say so to his face. Reverend Matthews was a kind man in his 60s who had known Vernon since he first came to Colorado, and he greeted Katherine with genuine warmth. "I am glad to see Vernon settling down," the Reverend said, shaking her hand. "He has been alone too long out on that ranch." The ceremony was simple. Just the Reverend, Vernon, Katherine, and 2 witnesses pulled from the street, a shopkeeper named Mrs. Chen and her husband who ran the dry goods store. Vernon had bought a simple gold band from the jeweler earlier that week, and when he slipped it on Katherine's finger, his hand trembled slightly. Katherine's hand was steady, though, when she placed her own simple band on his finger, and when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Vernon kissed her carefully, gently, as if she might break. Her lips were soft against his, and the kiss was brief, but it held promise, held the beginning of something real. They signed the papers making it official, and then they were married, bound together by law and faith, and the courage it had taken them both to reach for something better. Vernon took his wife's hand as they walked out of the church into the spring sunshine, and Katherine squeezed his fingers, looking up at him with eyes that held hope and trust in equal measure. "Well, Mr. Xavier," she said, "what do we do now?" "Now, Mrs. Xavier, we go home and start our life together." They stopped at the general store on the way out of town so Katherine could pick up some supplies she wanted, things for the kitchen and the house. Vernon watched as she carefully examined fabrics and notions, asking his opinion on colors and patterns, including him in decisions about their home in a way that made it feel more real, more shared. She was reaching for a bolt of yellow fabric on a high shelf when she lost her balance, wobbling on her toes. Vernon was there immediately, one hand on her back, the other reaching past her to grab the fabric before it could fall on her head. "I had it," Katherine protested, but she was smiling, leaning back into his steady presence. "I know you did," Vernon said into her ear, "but I told you I would catch you every time." Mrs. Chen, who was helping them, gave them a knowing smile. "You two are sweet together. I can already tell this is going to be a good marriage." The ride back to the ranch was different than the day before. Katherine sat closer to Vernon on the wagon bench, her shoulder touching his arm, comfortable in a way she had not been before. They were married now, legally bound, but more than that, they were beginning to know each other, to find the rhythms that would define their life together. When they arrived home, Vernon carried her over the threshold, which made her laugh and protest that he would hurt his back, but he held her easily, depositing her gently in the main room before going back for their packages. That night, Vernon made good on his promise about his cooking skills, preparing a dinner of fried chicken, potatoes, and greens that actually turned out well. Katherine helped where she could, and true to her word, she knocked over the salt shaker twice and nearly dropped a plate, but Vernon was always there, catching, steadying, keeping disaster at bay with hands that were surprisingly quick for such a large man. After dinner, they sat together on the porch again, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Katherine leaned against Vernon's shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. "Are you happy you came?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I know it has only been 2 days, but yes, I feel like I can breathe here, like there is space for me to be myself without constantly apologizing for existing." "You never have to apologize for existing, not with me." Vernon tightened his arm around her. "I want you to know that you are safe here, Katherine. Whatever happens, however long it takes for us to figure out how to be married to each other, you are safe." She turned to look up at him, and in the fading light her eyes were dark and serious. "I feel safe with you. I felt it from your very first letter, even before I saw your face. You have a good heart, Vernon Xavier. So do you, Katherine Xavier." The name seemed to please her, and she smiled, settling back against his shoulder. They stayed like that until the stars came out, until the chill of the evening drove them inside, until it was time to retreat to their separate bedrooms with soft goodnights, and the unspoken understanding that they would take this at whatever pace felt right. The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt both strange and comfortable. Vernon rose early to tend the cattle and handle the endless work that came with running a ranch. Katherine took over the cooking and began putting her own touches on the house, sewing new curtains, organizing the pantry, making it feel more like a home and less like a bachelor's rough dwelling. True to her word, she was clumsy in a way that would have been comical if it was not occasionally dangerous. She tripped over the threshold at least once a day, knocked things over with her elbows, and once managed to get her dress caught on a fence post and tear the hem while simply walking to the vegetable garden Vernon had shown her. But Vernon kept his word too. He caught her when she stumbled, steadied her when she wobbled, rescued dishes before they could hit the floor. He did it so naturally, so consistently, that it became a sort of dance between them, her gracelessness and his steady presence finding a balance that worked. 2 weeks into their marriage, Katherine was carrying a basket of laundry to the line when she caught her foot on a rock and went sprawling. Vernon, who had been working nearby, dropped his tools and ran to her, his heart in his throat until he reached her and found her sitting on the ground, laughing. "I am fine," she gasped out between giggles. "I am absolutely fine. I just looked so foolish." Vernon knelt beside her, checking her over for injuries anyway, his hands gentle on her arms and legs. "You did not look foolish. You looked like my wife who tripped on a rock." "Your wife who cannot walk across flat ground without finding something to fall over," Katherine corrected, but she was still smiling. Then her expression shifted, became more serious, more vulnerable. "Vernon, are you sure you do not regret this? Marrying someone so incompetent?" He sat back on his heels, stunned that she could even ask such a question. "Katherine Xavier, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You think I care if you trip over rocks. You make this house feel like a home. You make me laugh every single day. You are smart and kind and brave enough to come all the way to Colorado to marry a stranger. That is not incompetent. That is remarkable." Tears welled in her eyes, and she reached for him. Vernon pulled her into his arms, holding her there on the ground in the middle of the yard, not caring if anyone saw, not caring about anything except making sure she knew how much she meant to him. "I am falling in love with you," Katherine whispered against his chest. "I did not expect it to happen so fast, but I am." Vernon's heart felt too big for his chest. He tilted her face up, looked into her eyes, and said the truest thing he knew. "I am already in love with you, have been since you stumbled off that train into my arms." When he kissed her this time, it was different than the chaste kiss at their wedding. This was deeper, fuller, a promise and a claiming all at once. Katherine kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, and they stayed like that until they were both breathless. That night, Vernon did not go to the smaller bedroom. Katherine met him at the door to hers, taking his hand, leading him inside with a mixture of nervousness and certainty. They fumbled through their first time with tenderness and patience, learning each other's bodies the way they had been learning each other's hearts. And if it was not perfect, it was real and honest and full of affection. Afterward, lying tangled together in sheets that smelled like lavender, Vernon held his wife close and thought about how much his life had changed in such a short time. He had been alone for so long, had convinced himself that solitude was simply his lot in life. But Katherine had shown him something different, had brought light and laughter and love into corners that had been dark for years. "What are you thinking about?" Katherine asked sleepily, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "How grateful I am that you answered my advertisement. How lucky I am that you took a chance on me." "I think I am the lucky one," she murmured. "You could have had anyone, and you chose a clumsy girl from Pennsylvania who has never been west of Pittsburgh in her life." "I chose the perfect woman for me," Vernon corrected, kissing the top of her head. "And I will spend every day proving that to you." The spring turned to summer, and the ranch flourished under their combined care. Vernon expanded his herd with Katherine's enthusiastic encouragement, and she planted a garden that grew beyond anything he had imagined, producing vegetables in abundance. They worked side by side through long days, and they fell into bed together at night, exhausted and happy and more in love with each passing week. Katherine's clumsiness remained a constant, but Vernon became so attuned to her movements that he could anticipate her falls before they happened. He installed railings on the porch steps, secured rugs to the floor so they would not slip, and rearranged the kitchen so the most breakable items were on lower shelves. She still managed to find new ways to trip and stumble, but he was always there, catching her, and it became something of a joke between them. "I think you do it on purpose now," he teased one afternoon after catching her for the third time that day. "Just so you can be in my arms." "You caught me," Katherine said with mock innocence. "If I wanted to be in your arms, I could just ask." "Is that so?" Vernon pulled her closer. "Well then, Mrs. Xavier, would you like to be in my arms?" "Always," she said, and kissed him in the middle of the kitchen. The bread she had been baking forgotten in the oven until the smell of burning brought them back to reality. In late July, Thomas Ward invited them over for dinner, wanting to meet the woman who had tamed his reclusive neighbor. Thomas's wife Ellen had died several years back, and he lived alone with his 2 ranch hands, but he was a decent cook and a good neighbor, even if he could be gruff. The dinner went well, with Thomas and Katherine finding common ground in their love of books. He had a surprisingly extensive library for a cattleman, and he offered to loan her whatever she wanted to read. Vernon watched his wife's face light up as she examined Thomas's shelves, listening to her discuss novels and poetry with an intelligence that made him proud. On the ride home, Katherine was practically bouncing with excitement about the books she was borrowing. "Did you know he has a first edition of Hawthorne, and his collection of Shakespeare is incredible? Vernon, I could kiss you for moving out here." "You can kiss me anyway," Vernon pointed out, and she did, leaning over on the wagon seat to press her lips to his cheek. They had just turned onto the road that led to their ranch when a wheel hit a deep rut, jostling the wagon violently. Katherine, who had been leaning toward Vernon, lost her balance and started to topple right off the wagon. Vernon's arm shot out instantly, catching her around the waist and hauling her back against him with enough force to knock the breath from both of them. "Good Lord," Katherine gasped, clutching at his arm. "I nearly fell right off." Vernon's heart was pounding, adrenaline surging through him at how close she had come to serious injury. He pulled the wagon to a stop, needing a moment to calm himself. "Are you all right? Did you hurt anything?" "Only my pride," Katherine said, but her voice was shaky. "Vernon, I am so sorry. I should have been holding on better." He wrapped both arms around her, holding her tight against his chest, feeling her heart racing as fast as his own. "It is all right. You are all right. I caught you." "You always do," she whispered. They sat there for several minutes, just holding each other in the gathering dusk, until Vernon felt steady enough to drive again. He kept one arm around Katherine for the rest of the ride home, and she stayed pressed close to his side, both of them shaken by how quickly things could have gone wrong. That night, Vernon held her extra close in bed, unable to shake the image of her falling from the wagon. Katherine seemed to sense his unease because she wrapped herself around him, pressing kisses to his jaw and neck, murmuring reassurances. "I am here. I am safe. You caught me like you always do." "I will always catch you," Vernon vowed. "Always, Katherine. As long as I live, I will always be there to catch you." Summer faded into autumn, painting the aspens gold and bringing a crispness to the air that Vernon loved. The ranch was doing well, better than it ever had, and he knew it was because he had something to work for now, someone to build a future with. He and Katherine had fallen into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing, anticipating each other's needs, working together seamlessly despite her tendency to trip over everything. In late September, Katherine started feeling ill in the mornings, and it took her nearly 2 weeks to put together what was happening. When she told Vernon over breakfast one morning that she thought she might be with child, he nearly knocked over his coffee in his excitement. "Are you sure? When? How long?" The questions tumbled out of him in a rush. Katherine laughed at his reaction, her eyes bright with happy tears. "I am fairly certain. I should probably see the doctor in town to confirm, but all the signs are there. If I am right, the baby should come sometime in late April or early May." Vernon came around the table and pulled her into his arms, lifting her right off her feet and spinning her in a circle. "We are going to have a baby. Katherine, we are going to have a baby." "Put me down before I get dizzy and we both fall over," Katherine said. But she was laughing, holding onto his shoulders, looking at him with such love that he felt like the luckiest man alive. They rode into Granite the next day to see Dr. Harrison, who confirmed what Katherine had suspected. She was indeed pregnant, healthy and strong, and if all went well, they would be parents by spring. Vernon felt like he was walking on air as they left the doctor's office, and he insisted on buying Katherine whatever she wanted from the general store to celebrate. "I do not need anything," she protested. But he bought her fabric for new dresses that would accommodate her changing shape, peppermints to help with the nausea, and a beautiful leather-bound journal where she could write down her thoughts and memories of the pregnancy. The months that followed were both wonderful and challenging. Katherine's clumsiness seemed to worsen as her belly grew, her center of balance changing in ways that made walking treacherous. She fell more often, stumbled over things she would have normally avoided, and Vernon found himself in a constant state of vigilance, always watching, always ready to catch her. In November, she tripped on the porch steps and would have fallen face first if Vernon had not been right behind her. He caught her, but the force of stopping her fall sent them both to the ground, Vernon on his back with Katherine sprawled across his chest. They lay there for a moment, catching their breath, and then Katherine started to cry. "I am so scared I am going to hurt the baby with my clumsiness," she sobbed. "What if I fall when you are not there? What if I do something terrible?" Vernon held her as best he could in their awkward position, stroking her hair, murmuring comfort. "You are not going to hurt the baby. We are going to be more careful, and I am going to make sure this place is as safe as possible for you. We will get through this together, Katherine." True to his word, Vernon spent the next week making modifications to the ranch. He sanded down every rough spot on the porch, installed more railings, and even built a chair that Katherine could use near the kitchen so she could sit while cooking. He rearranged furniture to create wider pathways and removed any rugs that might cause her to slip. Winter came to Colorado with a vengeance, bringing snow that piled high against the house and temperatures that made going outside a challenge. Vernon insisted Katherine stay inside as much as possible, worried about her falling on ice, and she chafed at the restriction but understood his concern. Christmas was quiet but special, just the two of them in their warm house while snow fell outside. Vernon had carved a small cradle from pine, working on it secretly in the barn, and he gave it to Katherine on Christmas morning. She cried when she saw it, running her hands over the smooth wood, the careful joinery that spoke of hours of patient work. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Vernon, it is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "For our baby," he said, kneeling beside her chair, his hand on her swollen belly. "For our family." They spent the rest of the day in contented domesticity, cooking together, reading aloud from one of Thomas's borrowed books, making plans for the future. Katherine talked about teaching their child to read, about showing them the mountains, about raising them to be kind and brave. Vernon listened, adding his own hopes and dreams, and together they painted a picture of a life they were building with love and intention. The new year came, and with it, the final stretch of Katherine's pregnancy. She grew larger, more uncomfortable, and even more accident-prone. Vernon barely let her out of his sight, constantly hovering, and while she sometimes found it exasperating, she mostly found it endearing. In early March, she was standing by the stove, stirring a pot of soup, when she felt her feet go out from under her. She did not even have time to cry out before Vernon's arms were around her, catching her, lifting her away from the hot stove. "What happened?" he demanded, setting her carefully in a chair. "I do not know. I just started to fall." Katherine's hands were shaking as she looked at the stove, at how close she had come to burning herself or worse. "Vernon, I am so tired of being like this. I am so tired of being a danger to myself and everyone around me." Vernon knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. You are not a danger. You are my wife, the mother of my child, and the best thing that has ever happened to me. So you trip sometimes. So you fall. I will always be here to catch you, Katherine. Always. What if you are not here one day? What if something happens and you cannot catch me? Then you will catch yourself, Vernon said firmly. You are stronger than you think, Katherine. You came all the way to Colorado alone. You married a stranger. You built a life in a place you had never seen before. A little clumsiness does not change the fact that you are one of the bravest people I know. His words seemed to reach something deep inside her because she pulled him close, holding him tight, and he felt the tension drain out of her body. I love you so much, she said against his neck. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too, Vernon whispered back. More than I ever thought I could love anyone. April arrived with the promise of spring, the snow melting to reveal green grass, the trees beginning to bud. Catherine's time was drawing near, and Vernon was a bundle of nervous energy, checking on her constantly, making sure they had everything they would need for the birth. Dr. Harrison had agreed to come out to the ranch when Catherine's labor started, and Ellen Ward's sister, a midwife named Mrs. Patterson, who lived in town, would assist. Vernon had everything arranged, every detail planned, but he still felt utterly unprepared for what was coming. On a warm afternoon in late April, Catherine's water broke while she was helping Vernon fold laundry on the porch. She looked up at him with wide eyes, and he saw fear and excitement and determination all at once. "It is time," she said simply. Vernon rode into Granite faster than he had ever ridden before, collecting Dr. Harrison and Mrs. Patterson and getting them back to the ranch in record time. Catherine's labor progressed steadily through the afternoon and into the evening, and Vernon stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement even as he felt utterly helpless. "You are doing so well," he told her as another contraction racked her body. "You are so strong, Katherine, so brave." "I do not feel brave," she gasped out. "I feel like I am being torn in half." "You are the bravest person I know," Vernon insisted. "And soon we will have our baby, just hold on to me." She gripped his hand so hard he thought his bones might break, but he did not complain, just held her through each contraction, breathing with her, being her anchor in the storm of childbirth. As the night deepened, Catherine's strength began to flag, and Dr. Harrison looked concerned. "She is getting tired. We need her to push soon, but she needs to conserve her energy." Vernon leaned close to his wife's ear. "Katherine, listen to me. I know you are exhausted. I know this is the hardest thing you have ever done, but you can do this. You are going to bring our baby into the world, and I am going to be right here catching you both. I promise." Something in his words seemed to revive her. She looked at him with eyes that blazed with determination, and when the next contraction came, she pushed with everything she had. Vernon supported her, whispering encouragement, telling her how much he loved her, how proud he was. It took another hour of hard work, but finally, as dawn was breaking over the mountains, their baby entered the world with a loud, healthy cry. Dr. Harrison held up the squalling infant and announced, "It is a boy. You have a son." Vernon felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. The doctor cleaned the baby quickly and then placed him in Catherine's arms. She looked down at their child with such wonder, such pure love, that Vernon's heart felt like it might burst. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "Vernon, look at him. He is so beautiful." "He looks like you," Vernon said, sitting on the edge of the bed, wrapping his arm around his wife and child. "Same nose, same stubborn chin. Same eyes as his father," Katherine countered, and it was true. The baby's eyes, when they fluttered open, were the same deep brown as Vernon's. They named him Victor Nathaniel Xavier, and he became the center of their world. Vernon discovered that he could love even more than he had thought possible, his heart expanding to encompass this tiny person who depended on them for everything. Katherine proved to be a natural mother, despite her fears about her clumsiness. She was careful with Victor, always making sure she was sitting down before she held him, always having Vernon nearby when she needed to move around with the baby. Vernon built a special changing table with high sides so she would not have to worry about the baby rolling off, and he padded the corners of furniture throughout the house. The summer after Victor's birth was one of the happiest times of Vernon's life. He would come in from working the ranch to find Katherine sitting in the rocking chair that had been his mother's, nursing their son and singing softly. The sight never failed to move him, this picture of his family, safe and whole in his. Victor grew strong and healthy, and he seemed to have inherited his mother's clumsiness along with her eyes. Even as a baby, he was always wiggling, always moving in ways that seemed calculated to launch himself from whatever surface he was on. But Vernon and Katherine learned to work together, a well-coordinated team that caught their son every time he tumbled. One afternoon when Victor was about 6 months old, Katherine was carrying him across the kitchen when she tripped over one of his toys left on the floor. Vernon, who was washing dishes, turned at the sound of her gasp and saw her falling forward. He dropped the plate he was holding and lunged, catching both Katherine and Victor, pulling them against his chest as the plate shattered on the floor behind him. For a moment, they all just stood there, Katherine and Victor cradled against Vernon's body, breathing hard. Then Victor started to laugh, a delighted baby giggle that broke the tension, and Katherine joined in, and finally Vernon, until all three of them were laughing in the middle of the kitchen surrounded by broken crockery. "I cannot believe you caught us both," Katherine said when she could speak again. "I told you I would catch you every time," Vernon reminded her. "Both of you, all of you, whoever needs catching." As Victor grew into a toddler, he kept them on their toes in ways they had never imagined. He was curious and fearless and absolutely determined to explore everything, which meant he was constantly falling, bumping into things, and getting into trouble. But he also had his mother's sweet nature and his father's stubbornness, and watching him grow was a joy that made the sleepless nights and constant vigilance worthwhile. When Victor was 2 years old, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect, and she only seemed to get more beautiful as she grew round with their second child. Their daughter, Virginia Rose Xavier, was born on a crisp October morning in 1879, and she was the spitting image of her father. She had his dark hair, his serious expression, and mercifully, she did not seem to have inherited the family clumsiness. Even as a baby, she was steady and calm, a perfect balance to her rambunctious older brother. Vernon and Katherine's family grew, their love deepened, and the ranch prospered. Vernon expanded his operation, hiring ranch hands to help with the work, building a larger barn and additional pastures. Thomas Ward became like family, a surrogate grandfather to the children, who adored his gruff manner and the stories he told. The years passed in a blur of hard work and laughter, of children growing and love deepening. Vernon and Katherine added 2 more children to their family, another son named Vincent in 1881, and a second daughter, Violet, in 1883. Their house was full of noise and chaos and joy, and Vernon could not imagine his life any other way. Katherine's clumsiness remained a constant throughout the years, but it became something they all adapted to, a quirk that was just part of who she was. The children learned early to watch out for their mother, to help pick up things she dropped, to steady her when she wobbled. And Vernon was always there, always watching, always ready to catch her when she fell. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1886, Vernon and Katherine sat on the porch after putting the children to bed, watching the sun set over the mountains just like they had done on their first night together. Katherine leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, marveling at how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked quietly. "Marrying a clumsy mail-order bride you had never met?" Vernon turned to look at her, seeing the silver threads starting to show in her auburn hair, the laugh lines around her eyes, the face he had come to love more with each passing day. "Not for a single second. You gave me everything, Katherine. A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning. You gave me love I did not even know I was capable of feeling." "You gave me the same," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "You gave me a place to belong, someone who sees all my flaws and loves me anyway, children who fill my heart to bursting. You gave me a life I could never have imagined when I was alone in Pennsylvania." "I promised I would catch you every time you fell," Vernon said, kissing her softly. "And I always will. For the rest of our lives, however long we have, I will always be there to catch you." "And I will always love you for it," Katherine promised. They sat together as the stars came out, talking about their children's futures, about the ranch, about growing old together. Vernon thought about that first letter he had received, about Katherine's honest admission of her clumsiness, about his response that had changed both their lives. He thought about every fall he had caught her from, every stumble he had prevented, every moment they had built together. The children grew, as children do. Victor became a tall, strong young man who loved working the ranch with his father. Virginia grew into a thoughtful, steady young woman who wanted to be a teacher. Vincent showed a talent for working with horses that amazed everyone. And Violet, their youngest, had her mother's clumsiness and her father's determination, a combination that kept everyone on their toes. When Victor turned 18 in 1895, he told his parents he wanted to stay on the ranch, to learn everything Vernon could teach him about running the operation. Vernon felt a deep pride that his son wanted to carry on what he had built, and he began teaching Victor all the skills he would need to take over someday. Virginia left for a teaching college in Denver, and while Vernon missed her terribly, he was proud of her for pursuing her dreams. She wrote home every week, long letters that Katherine read aloud to the family, telling them about her studies and the city and the friends she was making. Vincent and Violet were still at home, teenagers full of energy and opinions, and the house remained lively. Katherine, now in her 40s, had learned to navigate her clumsiness with more grace, though she still tripped and stumbled regularly. Vernon, whose hair was now more gray than brown, still caught her every single time. One spring morning in 1897, Vernon woke before dawn to find Katherine already awake, looking out the window at the mountains. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing. How lucky we are. How much I love this life we built together." She turned in his arms to face him. "Vernon, do you remember when I first arrived here? How scared I was that you would regret choosing me. I remember. And I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I was a mess. I had dust all over me from the train, and I fell before we even left the platform. And I caught you, just like I promised I would." Vernon cupped her face in his hands. "Katherine Xavier, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Every fall I have caught, every stumble I have prevented, every moment we have shared has been a gift. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I love you so much. After all these years, I love you more than I did the day I married you, and I did not think that was possible. "I know exactly what you mean," Vernon said, and kissed her as the sun rose over the mountains, bathing them in golden light. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, joys and sorrows. Thomas Ward passed away in 1899, leaving his ranch to Victor, who ran both properties with skill and dedication. Virginia came home from Denver with a husband, a kind man who had been one of her professors, and they settled in Granite where she taught at the local school. Vincent left to work on a horse breeding operation in Montana, and while they missed him, they were proud of the life he was building. Violet, true to form, fell in love with a local rancher's son and married him in a ceremony that had Katherine crying happy tears the entire time. Vernon and Katherine became grandparents, delighting in the children their own children brought into the world. The ranch house that had once seemed too big for just the two of them was often filled with grandchildren running through the rooms, filling it with laughter and noise. Through it all, Vernon kept his promise. When Katherine's joints grew stiff with age and her balance became even more precarious, he was there, steady as a rock, catching her every time she stumbled. He built ramps over steps that had become too difficult for her to navigate, installed handrails throughout the house, made their home as safe as he could make it. On a summer evening in 1906, 30 years after Katherine had first stepped off that train in Granite, she and Vernon sat on their porch surrounded by children and grandchildren. Victor and his wife were there with their 3 children, Virginia and her husband with their 2, Violet and her husband with their baby daughter. Vincent had come home for the summer, and the house was full to bursting. As they all sat together, watching the sunset, one of the grandchildren asked Katherine how she and Vernon had met. Katherine smiled and took Vernon's hand, and together they told the story they had told many times before, about letters across the distance, about a mail-order bride who warned that she was clumsy, about a rancher who promised to catch her every time. "And has he?" the grandchild asked. "Has he caught you every time?" Katherine looked at Vernon, seeing the man who had been her partner, her love, her constant support for 3 decades. "Every single time," she said softly. "He has never let me fall." "And I never will," Vernon added, squeezing her hand. As the evening wore on and the family talked and laughed together, Vernon reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had been alone once, convinced that solitude was all he deserved. But Katherine had changed everything, had shown him that love was not just possible but abundant. That family was not just about blood but about choosing each other every single day. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Vernon and Katherine lay together in the darkness of their room. Katherine's head was on his chest and he stroked her hair, feeling the peace that came from a life well lived. "Vernon," she said quietly. "Yes, love, thank you for catching me. Not just when I fall, but in every way. You caught me when I was falling into despair in Pennsylvania. You caught me when I was afraid I would never find love. You caught my heart and kept it safe all these years." Vernon felt emotion tighten his throat. "You caught me too, Katherine. I was falling long before I knew it, falling into loneliness and bitterness. You saved me just as much as I saved you. We saved each other," she said. "Yes," Vernon agreed. "We saved each other." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and Vernon's last thought before sleep claimed him was that he was the luckiest man who had ever lived. The years continued their steady march forward. Vernon and Katherine grew older, their hair white, their bodies slower, but their love remained as strong as ever. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1916 surrounded by children, grandchildren, and now even a few great-grandchildren. Vernon was 72 years old now and Katherine was 63, and while their bodies had aged, The core of who they were remained unchanged. She was still clumsy, still tripping over her own feet, still knocking things over. And he was still catching her, still steadying her, still keeping his promise. On a crisp autumn morning in 1918, Vernon woke to find Katherine struggling to get out of bed, her joints stiff with arthritis. He helped her up gently, supporting her weight as they walked to the kitchen, his arm steady around her waist. "I hate being so helpless," Katherine said, frustrated with her body's limitations. "You are not helpless," Vernon said firmly. "You are my wife, and you are still the strongest woman I know. Just because you need help does not make you weak." They had breakfast together, moving slowly but contentedly through their morning routine. Victor came by to check on them, bringing his eldest son who was learning the ranch business. Virginia stopped in with fresh bread from the bakery her husband ran. The house was never empty for long, their family always circling back to them, making sure they were cared for. That evening, as they sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, watching another Colorado sunset, Katherine reached for Vernon's hand. "Do you remember what you wrote in that first letter?" she asked. "When I told you I was clumsy, of course I remember. I said I would catch you every time." "And you have. 42 years, Vernon. 42 years of catching me every time I fell." "Best job I have ever had," Vernon said, bringing her hand to his lips. Katherine smiled, that same smile that had caught his heart all those years ago on a dusty train platform. "I want you to know that even if you had not always been there to catch me physically, you caught me in all the ways that matter. You caught my tears when I was sad, my fears when I was scared, my dreams when they felt too big to hold alone. You have been my anchor, my partner, my great love." "Katherine," Vernon's voice was rough with emotion, "you gave meaning to my life. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You taught me how to really live, how to love, how to be part of something bigger than myself. Every day with you has been a gift." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, the same mountains that had witnessed their entire life together. "I am not afraid anymore," Katherine said softly. "Of falling, I mean. Because I know you will always be there." "Always," Vernon promised. "For as long as I have breath in my body, I will always be there to catch you." The seasons turned, bringing them into 1920. Vernon was 76 now, and while his body was not what it used to be, his devotion to Katherine had not diminished one bit. He still helped her from bed each morning, still steadied her when she walked, still caught her when she stumbled. Their children worried about them living alone on the ranch, but Vernon and Katherine were content. They had everything they needed, each other most of all, and the constant stream of visitors kept them connected to the family they had built together. One warm spring afternoon, Katherine was walking in the garden she had tended for decades when her foot caught on a root. She felt herself falling, saw the ground rushing up to meet her, and then Vernon's arms were around her, impossibly strong despite his age, pulling her back against his chest. They stood there for a long moment, both breathing hard, and Katherine turned in his arms to look up at her husband. His face was lined with age, his hair completely white, but his brown eyes were the same ones that had looked at her with such hope and promise all those years ago. "You caught me," she said. "I always will," he replied. That night they made love slowly and carefully, their bodies knowing each other so well that words were unnecessary. Afterward, Katherine fell asleep in Vernon's arms, and he held her close, listening to her steady breathing, feeling grateful for every moment they had shared. Morning came soft and gentle, sunlight streaming through the curtains Vernon had helped Katherine make when they were young. He woke slowly, reaching for his wife, but something was wrong. Katherine was too still, too quiet. "Katherine," he said her name softly, then again with more urgency. "Katherine," she did not respond. Vernon's heart began to race as he shook her gently, then more firmly, but she remained still. He pressed his ear to her chest, searching desperately for a heartbeat, and found only silence. She was gone. Vernon sat up, pulling Katherine into his arms, and a sound came from deep within him that he had never made before, a raw grief that seemed to tear him apart from the inside. She had died peacefully in her sleep, held safe in his arms, but that knowledge did nothing to ease the devastating emptiness that crashed over him. The family came quickly after Victor found them, Vernon still holding Katherine, refusing to let her go. It took Victor and Vincent both to gently pry their father's arms from around their mother's body, and even then Vernon reached for her, trying to hold on to what he had already lost. The funeral was 3 days later, attended by what seemed like half of Colorado. Katherine had touched so many lives over the years, had been a friend to everyone she met, and they all came to say goodbye. But Vernon barely noticed any of it. He stood by her grave in a daze, unable to comprehend a world without her in it. In the weeks that followed, Vernon moved through his days like a ghost. He went through the motions of living because his children needed him to, but the light had gone out of his eyes. The house felt too big, too empty, too full of memories that cut like knives. He sat on the porch every evening, in the rocking chair next to the one Katherine had favored, talking to her as if she could hear him. He told her about his day, about the grandchildren, about how much he missed her. And sometimes, in the gentle evening breeze, he swore he could feel her presence, could almost hear her voice. Victor tried to convince him to move in with his family, but Vernon refused. "This is where we built our life together," he said. "I cannot leave it." 6 months after Katherine's death, on a cold October evening, Vernon sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, looking at the stars. He was tired, bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. He missed his wife with an ache that never eased, and he was ready to rest. He thought about their life together, about every moment from that first letter to the last time he had held her. He thought about every fall he had caught her from, every smile she had given him, every night they had spent wrapped in each other's arms. He thought about the family they had created, the love they had shared, the life they had built from nothing but hope and courage. "I am coming, Katherine," he whispered to the night sky. "I promised I would always catch you, and I cannot do that from here. Wait for me, love. I am coming." Vernon closed his eyes, and in his mind, he could see her, young and beautiful, stepping off that train in Granite all those years ago. He could see himself catching her as she stumbled, could feel the electricity of that first touch, could hear her voice saying his name for the first time. The vision shifted, and suddenly they were dancing at their daughter Virginia's wedding, Katherine's head on his shoulder, her feet trampling his with regularity, both of them laughing. Then they were in their bedroom on the night Victor was born, exhausted and amazed, staring at the miracle they had created. Then they were old, sitting on this very porch, hands clasped, watching the sunset together. "Every fall," Vernon murmured, his breathing slowing. "I caught you every time." Vernon Xavier died peacefully that night, sitting in his rocking chair on the porch, a slight smile on his face. His son Victor found him the next morning, and while there was grief, there was also a sense of rightness. Vernon and Katherine had been inseparable in life, and it seemed fitting that they should not be parted long in death. They buried Vernon next to Katherine, under the wide Colorado sky they had both loved. The headstone, chosen by their children, reads simply, "Vernon and Katherine Xavier." He caught her every time. She loved him forever. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, and the story of Vernon and Katherine became legend. Their great-great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch and hear about the mail-order bride who warned she was clumsy and the rancher who promised to catch her every time, and about the great love story that grew from such humble beginnings. The house itself became a testament to their love, with all the modifications Vernon had made over the years still in place. The railings he had installed, the careful padding on corners, the lower shelves in the kitchen, all remained as reminders of a man who had loved his wife so much that he had reshaped their entire world to keep her safe. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right through the porch, sometimes it sounded like laughter, like two people who had loved each other through everything life could throw at them, still finding joy in each other's company, still catching each other every single time. The legacy Vernon and Katherine left was not just in the ranch they had built or the children they had raised, but in the example they had set. They had shown that love was not about perfection, but about acceptance, that it was not about never falling, but about always being caught. That true partnership meant being there for each other through every stumble, every challenge, every moment of weakness. Their story was told and retold through the generations, a reminder that sometimes the best love stories start with honest vulnerability and a promise to always be there. That sometimes the greatest romance is not found in grand gestures, but in the daily choice to catch someone every time they fall, to steady them when they wobble, to love them not despite their flaws, but because those flaws make them who they are. Vernon had kept his promise for more than 4 decades, catching Katherine every single time she fell. And in doing so, he had built a love that lasted beyond death, beyond time, beyond anything that could be measured or quantified. He had loved her completely, protected her fiercely, and cherished her always. And Katherine, for her part, had given him everything. She had taken a chance on a stranger, had built a life in a wild place, had loved him with her whole heart. She had given him children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, had filled his house with laughter and warmth, had made every day of his life better just by being in it. Together, they had proven that mail-order marriages could be based on real love, that vulnerability could be strength, that admitting your flaws to someone could be the beginning of something beautiful. They had shown that promises made in good faith should be kept, that love was a choice made every single day, and that the best relationships were built on a foundation of honesty, trust, and unwavering support. The ranch continued to thrive, the family continued to grow, and the story of Vernon and Katherine continued to inspire. On their headstone, fresh flowers appeared regularly, placed by family members who wanted to honor the couple who had started it all, who had loved each other so completely that their love became the foundation on which generations built their lives. And if you stood in that cemetery on a quiet evening, with the wind blowing down from the mountains and the sun setting in a blaze of color, you might almost hear it, a whisper carried on the breeze, the echo of a promise kept for a lifetime and beyond. I will catch you every time, and I will love you forever.